The saints are always conducing us to union with God because that's their lives. What is the process of canonization in the Catholic Church? Canonization is the process by where individuals become named officially by the Church as saints. That is a lofty title. Imagine if you lived a life of such holiness that you were universally regarded by the Church to be a saint in heaven. It's a remarkable statement. There's a 4-stage, very rigorous process by which someone would be declared a saint in the Catholic Church. This process can take years, decades, and in some cases even centuries, which is remarkable if you think about it. Those, for instance, who began the cause of the saint years ago never lived long enough to see the individual canonized all the way through. Typically, a canonization process cannot start until the person who's being proposed for canonization has been dead for at least 5 years. So let me start with canonization. So the word canon from the Greek means list. This is like the list of the saints in heaven that the Church declares. So there's 4 parts to the process of becoming a saint in the Catholic Church. The first is called servant of God. So when an individual is declared servant of God, the local bishop will investigate the life of this candidate for holiness, see whether or not they actually had a reputation for being someone of a holy life, someone who lived very close to God. And this submission would be introduced to the Vatican's dicastery for the causes of the saints to permit an investigation. At this point here, no miracles are necessary. But it is important that those who are proposing the canonization, the official declaration of this individual as a saint, has some proof of the body of the saint. Meaning to say that the saint can't be some mythical character that people dreamed up, but there actually has to be a physical body. This actually includes, at some point here in the process, the exhumation, the removal from the ground of the said individual who's being proposed for sainthood. So again, what the Church is trying to avoid is canonizing individuals without actual physical evidence that they actually existed in the first place. So that's the first stage. The second stage is that the Vatican then declares the individual a venerable. This, of course, is someone who Rome has deemed lived a life of heroic virtue. And if this is approved and confirmed by the Holy Father, the Pope, the candidate is declared as venerable. Then we get to the more, I like to call, interesting phases of this process, because these first 2 stages, the servant of God stage and the venerable stage, they can kind of be slow going. Most people, unless you're involved very directly with the cause itself, led by an individual called a postulator, who's going to postulate that this person should be recognized as a saint. Many of these things happen in the background. Most people are not even aware that this is actually occurring until we get to this stage, which is called the beatification stage, where an individual is declared a blessed. Here, one miracle attributed to the candidate's intercession must be verified by an independent medical and theological expert, or usually a panel of them, so experts, confirming that usually we're talking about a healing was instantaneous, permanent, and scientifically unexplainable. So typically, for instance, let's say someone has a terminal illness, they begin praying to a venerable through their further intercession, not as God, but as a saint, as a friend of God, and asking for their intercession to secure from God the graces from whom all graces flow, intercession for a particular healing. And here, if theological and medical experts can verify that an unexplainable, scientifically verified cure has occurred through the intercession of praying to a particular venerable, they are made blessed, or they're the ceremony is called a beatification. Now, martyrs, those who give their lives for the faith, do not require this step for beatification. And then finally, and this is really the crowning glory, you have now the formal canonization as a saint. Here, there has a second distinct miracle is required in order to move from being a blessed to being a saint. The Pope authorizes the final decree, formally enrolling that person in the canon or the list of saints. So you notice here that the Holy Father, the Pope, has the final say. The verification of the miracles must be tested out by medical and theological experts to rule out any natural causes for the intercession or the role of the saint. And it should be noted that the Holy Father always reserves the right to waive some of the requirements, especially when it involves extraordinary cases and or martyrs. Martyrs are typically almost always escorted and ushered through the process without many of the rigorous requirements that are required for those who did not die as witnesses of Christ by shedding their blood, sort of your, if you like to say, your garden variety saint, simply because of the heroic nature of their death. Now, it's interesting because, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, this process can take years, decades, and in some cases, centuries. There is a saint who, with a peculiar name, his name is Venerable Bede. His name is Saint Bede. But the name Venerable stuck with him. He died in about the year 735, but believe it or not, his feast day is May 25, and he's recognized both not only in the Catholic Church, but also in the Anglican Church as a doctor of the Church, and he was declared so in 1899. And his title Venerable has nothing to have done with the fact that he was a servant of God, then Venerable, then Blessed, and then a canonized saint. But it has everything to do that within 2 generations of his death, again in the year 735, individuals throughout the Catholic Church had such a high regard for his wisdom, his scholarship, and his holiness that they just connected the term venerable to his name. Many times I'm asked if Venerable Bede is actually not a saint, he's just still a venerable, which is one step below beatify. I said, no, Venerable Bede is actually a Saint Bede. He just garnered that name in about the 8th century. The process of canonization is extremely important in the Catholic Church. We rely on the saints for their intercession, for inspiration, for motivation, and also, most importantly, for their witness of a life of holiness. When holiness seems to be out of reach, a little bit beyond our grasp, the saints are always there, not only to intercede for us as God's friends, but also to give us a perpetual example of the kinds of saints that there are and have lived in the world and now glorify God forever in heaven. There are saints who are youth. There are saints who were older persons. There are saints from practically every walk of life, whether they were clerics or lay people, they were soldiers or politicians, some even incarcerated. Others who had massive conversions to Christ. Others lived a life of relative holiness and piety throughout most of their lives. The list of the saints, their variety, and the splendor of their witness continues to uphold and fortify the entire Catholic Church and all Christians around the world. So if you haven't developed a devotion to a particular saint, or perhaps you don't know much about the saint after whom you've been named, I always recommend that people become friends with that saint by studying their life, by praying for their intercession, and hopefully by imitating their lives here on earth so that, like them, we can join them in heaven to glorify God forever. The saints never stand in the way of our direct connection with God, but the way that one might want to think about it is simply this. When you need a favor, or you want to be in contact with someone who's very important, in this case, God, isn't it often the case it's as useful to not only be in touch with the person directly, but also for those who influence that individual? This is in part what the saints do. They intercede on our behalf. So the saints are always conducing us to union with God, because that's their lives. And so we're trying to engender their support, their intercession, in order to make our petitions more pleasing to God, and also to grow in a life of holiness commensurate with the lives that they led here on earth. So it's not either praying to God or praying to the saints, but in the ancient Catholic tradition, we always say the great both and. Always to God first and foremost, but the intercession of the saints who are our friends, and most notably His, always support us in this conversation and communication that we're always trying to have with Almighty God. If you like this content, always feel free to click on the links above. As always, like, subscribe, and share. And again, thanks and God bless.